now. So hi judges, my name's Maddie Christensen, and I'm the first affirmative speaker on this resolution that the National Football League should significantly reduce its eligibility restrictions for younger players. So we're going to start with some quick groundwork, some definitions for this round. Basically, eligibility restrictions for younger players, as the resolution gave us some background. To be eligible for the draft, players must have been out of high school for at least 3 years and must have used up their college eligibility before the start of the next college football season. So underclassmen and players who have graduated before using all their college eligibility may request the league's approval to enter the draft early. So essentially what this is saying is you have to have been out of high school for at least 3 years, and then there are college requirements as well. With that in mind, our value for this round is utilitarianism, the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people. So we believe whichever side can support that, we ask that you cast your ballot in their favor. Let's get into our case. So we're going to start with talking about the harms and inherencies of the status quo. Then we're going to get into our policy. And last but not least, we're going to talk about the positive effects of our policy in our third contention. So our first contention, harms and inherencies of the status quo. The draft. Subpoint A is talent. If someone is talented enough to play for the NFL when they leave high school or midway through college, they should have the ability to do so. But in the status quo, they either need to wait 3 years after leaving high school or go to college to play. This is a very simple subpoint, but we believe that the foundational layout that this provides of fairness and justice for these players is important to keep in mind throughout this round. Now, our second subpoint to our first contention is unnecessary injury. You see, judges, only 1.6% of college football players actually get drafted for the NFL. In the NCAA, there are 20,700 football injuries a year, and of those, 841 are spinal injuries. To hold the perspective of being in the NFL, these strings are unfair to these athletes, as they don't receive compensation if they're injured. 90% of college football athletes report that they've been injured while playing, and 54% say that they continued playing even after being injured. Judges, we've seen this time and time again, college athletes getting injured playing football because these people are desperate to try and get drafted for the NBA or for the NFL. So they put their everything into playing football in college. And when over 20,000 injuries are occurring every year in college football, and only 1.6% of these players are actually getting drafted for the NFL, we can see that there's a huge amount of unnecessary injury and risk put on these players. Now, judges, if these players were not required to wait 3 years after graduating high school, many more could have realized that they were not qualified to play in the NFL right after high school graduation when they applied to enter the draft. This would allow thousands of players to immediately focus on other venues, other perspectives, and options for what they should be doing with their lives, rather than focusing throughout college solely on qualifying for the NFL, putting their bodies at risk, only to realize that over 98% of these players don't actually get drafted. Subpoint C is lack of fair pay. Some people might say, what's the rush? Why would it matter? Well, there's a huge economic reason, because the NFL pays for their players to play for them and college football does not. The fact that there's a 3-year wait period out of high school graduation for these athletes is unfair, in that just paying a few years in professional football can ensure that they have food on the table, can ensure that their futures are well secured. So these years of playing for college football, instead of immediately getting money if they were able to join the NFL, this is a huge inequality, because these college athletes aren't getting paid and they are at risk for the injuries that are occurring to their bodies. These injuries that are occurring because they're pushing themselves so hard because they want to be in that 1.6% that's getting drafted, and yet over 98% of them are not. So let's get into our policy. Our mandate is that we will significantly reduce the rule that players must go to college or wait 3 years to be eligible for the draft. Essentially, what this means is that once you turn 18, you may be eligible. We will follow rules similar to that of the NBA, where athletes can be drafted right out of high school. Administration is going to be the National Football League. Enforcement and funding are normal ways and means, and our time frame is the next draft year. So this takes us into our solvent. Yes, I'll take your POI.
For sure. So I just had a question about your previous contention. You mentioned that oftentimes in college football, these players get injured and then they're no longer able to play. So my question is, do you think college football or NFL football is more dangerous for these students?
I think that the issue with this current topic is that over 98% of the people getting injured, all of these athletes in college, they aren't actually making it to the NFL. They aren't going anywhere. So their injuries are for nothing. They're getting injured and there's no reward. They aren't even getting paid. They aren't getting compensated for their injuries. So regardless of the level of injury, the fact that these players are receiving no pay, no compensation, and they're putting their bodies at the highest level of risk because they want to be in that 1.6%, when in reality, the chances are most of them won't be. So it's a huge amount of unnecessary risk that doesn't even have to be occurring. So this actually, after I've gone over my policy now, takes us into the positive effects of our policy. So subpoint A is less risk of injury. So you see, judges, this will prevent unnecessary injury in college football from students attempting to make it to the NFL. As we stated earlier, the years where an extremely talented player must play for college is dangerous for them, as they aren't being paid for their talent and they are at risk for their injuries that occur. And judges, if they get injured in the NFL, they will have professional health care and insurance by the NFL. So they are going to be covered. They will be set. But in college, they are the ones at risks. Now, our second subpoint is fair use of talent. We are allowing people who are extremely talented to use their talents to their greatest effect. What do Kobe Bryant, Kevin Garnett, and Tracy McGrady all have in common? They were athletes who went to the NBA straight out of high school and became legends of basketball. Now, in opening these gates up for football, we will allow high school graduates to play to their greatest skill level. Our third subpoint is the fair use of money. As we pointed out in our earlier contention, young talents are getting robbed of their talent and skills in the NFL. An example would be Jadavion Clowney, a sophomore defensive end at South Carolina. He was by far the best player on his team, yet he couldn't join the NFL even though multiple teams wanted him as their first draft round pick. The impacts of these judges is that we are allowing these people to not get paid for their talents, and we are allowing this inequality to continue to go on, even though only 1.6 of them are actually going somewhere with it. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that speech. So my name is Ria Jane. I will be the first speaker for the negation side in today's debate. And what I'll be doing in this speech as a quick off-time roadmap is I'll be going over our two disadvantages, and then I'll be going over the affirmative case in order. Cool. With that, my time begins now. Renee and I negate the resolution that resolved the National Football League should significantly reduce its eligibility restrictions for younger players. Let's jump straight into our first disadvantage, which is on education. Now, judges, I want to start with an overview. Because college students, because these football players have to wait 3 years until they are out of high school, or until they are no longer eligible for college football, this means that they prioritize getting into a good college for football and practicing the sport that they love before making the monumental, life-changing decision to enter the NFL. Now, we're going to be arguing that this is important for two major reasons. First of all, this incentivizes students to go and attend a college and get more college education. Because people cannot get drafted straight out of high school right now, they are more likely to go to a college in that time and hone their skills on some of the best college teams in the nation. In addition, it simply makes sense. If they go to college, they are basically saying that they are prioritizing their education. If they have the option to get drafted right out of high school, this means they are a lot less likely to apply to colleges or even think about colleges, meaning they don't have access to this education. Judges, I want to bring up one point, which is that out of approximately the 1,600 NFL players right now, only 7 of them did not get a college education. And that's because that they came from other countries and literally did not have this requirement. But the thing is, when you pass the affirmatives plan, what you do is ensure that these players think that, oh, I can just go to football right out of high school, which is extremely detrimental. That leads me to my second point, which is on financial planning. Now, the average NFL career lasts less than 4 seasons per Statista. Many assume that making it to the big leagues practically guarantees a player will live a comfortable life for the rest of their days, making tens of millions of dollars a year. But in reality, few athletes see that level of wealth. Did you know that 78% of NFL players go broke within 2 years after their career ends? And the problem is, the younger you are, the less guidance you get on managing your money. This is why countless athletes spend recklessly and make bad decisions, poor investments, because they are so young. Whereas on the other hand, older athletes across all types of sports tend to end up being less broke because one, they invest more money in financial planning, and two, they take college courses that can help with this due to a growing trend of athletes taking financial planning lessons in college. Now, what are the links? First, in the world of the affirmative, then the younger players don't have to wait these years of college before getting drafted, meaning they have no incentive to go to college or get this education. Two, education within college due to college requirements, meaning that even if these players do go, they won't be incentivized to maintain a good GPA all throughout college. They can just drop out halfway through and go to the
point of information.
I'll take it at the end of this contention. And third, college teaching good financial planning through these courses is key to preventing poverty later in life. Now on to our impacts. Our major impact here is education. Football players that get drafted into the NFL at 18 won't get a good education because they choose to skip out on college education. The A point here is that countless studies show how college is key to brain development. This is key to long-term successes in life and performing better even on the football field due to critical thinking skills. B, even though who do end up going to college make better life decisions and often have a backup plan in case things work out. And finally, C, college is key for poverty because in case these athletes get injured on the field in the NFL, they need a second option, which is the internal link to preventing long-term poverty. I'll take your POI.
So you said that most of the NFL athletes go broke, right? But if they have a college education, why is that such a, why, you know what I'm saying? Why would it be such an issue in the status quo if they're all college educated?
For sure, yeah. I specifically mentioned that more often than not, the younger athletes that get drafted end up going broke quicker. So we can see that when these people don't end up doing it as soon as they get out of college, or specifically the people that don't attend college but go straight to the NFL after they finish, are no longer eligible for college. They're the people that are getting having fewer financial decisions. Okay, moving on to our second disadvantage on youth drafting being bad. The first point here is physical stress. Professional football is extremely violent on the young body. This sport requires that bodies are mature. It takes years of weightlifting and training to withstand the pain and aggression that players face in the field. Young players just simply do not have the physique of their older counterparts, leading to serious injuries, as my opponents brought up as well. The second point here is exploitation. The NFL makes billions of dollars every year where players risk their brains for the profit of the owner. The younger that these players are, the more vulnerable they will be to this exploitation and unlikely to fight back. And the third argument here is that this hones their skills. At 18 years old, there are a bunch of good players in the NFL, but the thing is, the NFL is not just looking for kids or teenagers straight out of high school. They're looking for grown men. Whereas in longevity, we can see that if players commit to the sport for the next 3 years in college through college football, this proves their dedication, and it's more likely that they won't quit the sport, which means you get a better quality of football players in the NFL in the long term. So let's look at the links. First, the NFL would be weaponizing the dreams of people, these young 18-year-olds becoming pro players by coercing them into a dangerous sport that requires the majority of their money. Secondly, this wins on probability because their entire lives will be ruined if they face just one life-threatening injury. And finally, third, this causes more NFL burnouts as people believe that they're committed because they did football in high school and end up not wanting to do it anymore, and the NFL has no way to
Point
test
of information.
I'll take it after this contention.
Okay.
On to the impacts. The major impact here is physical and mental health. We can see that, mainly physical health. We can see that this is depression is harder to depression after failure is harder to cope with when you're a teenager with an undeveloped prefrontal cortex. And additionally, they can face dehumanization from being discriminated against the NFL and exploited. These impacts weigh on severity because the physical health that these people could be losing would impact their career for the rest of their lives. I'll take your POI.
My question is, doesn't the college do the exact same thing that you're talking about with the coercion, but in this case, you aren't getting paid?
I'll address that more in your case. On to my opponent's case. The overview on this case is that they bring up that this round should be based on utilitarianism, but the AF doesn't have their access to their own weighing mechanism because they ruin the quality of life of their young athletes. Now, onto their first contention of the harms of the status quo. Drafting high school athletes is bad for 8 reasons. First of all, they bring up talent, but talent doesn't mean that they have maturity or even the ability to withstand more competition. Many talented players are struck by the fact that they're no longer the best players at their small school, and thus they should be exposed to college football before anything goes bad. Secondly, they say that there's unnecessary injury, but turn this against them. The younger that players are, the more that they're likely to disregard their doctor's advice and play even with an injury. Third, cross-apply how even after over a few years of college, their bodies are building up more strength and maturity, which eliminates the strong players from the weak by the time that they want to enter the league. Fourth, on their links, they say that players could realize they weren't qualified and focus on something else in life, but turn this against them. College helps you realize if you can do something or not. If they immediately went to the NFL, on the other hand, then they might make bad decisions based off of the fact that they're 18. They're still too immature. They will go into their dreams later. Then, fifth, they say that the NFL pays for players, whereas college doesn't. But college football doesn't coerce these players, because we can see that even if they're still getting an education at the same time, which is in the long term better. But then sixth, we can see that they say that just playing a few years in college football will give them a secure career. But remember, football will never be a secure job, because one injury destroys their entire career. Judges, what is better, having a career that's really unstable, but having the backup option from having a college degree, or not even having this backup option at all? Seven, I asked them a POI which said, is NFL football or college football more dangerous? And they didn't even respond to that. They just said that injuries are bad. But the problem is NFL football is more dangerous, which means that they would be more injured more in the NFL. So the thing is, there's going to be injuries happening anyway, but it's better in our world to see if these people are cut out for it or not, due to their experience with college. And finally, their plan is that the 3 years requirement gets removed. But the eighth response is that high school graduates are extremely vulnerable to exploitation, because they're just deciding to do with their lives. The NFL uses this passion to get money out of them and pays very little. Now, my partner can cover the rest of the second advantage, but until then, I urge a negative ballot.
All right. Is everyone ready? All right. Judges ready? Opposition ready? All right. My time will begin on my first word. Hello, everyone. My name is Hunter Valencia, and I am the second affirmation speaker in the resolution. The National Football League should significantly reduce its eligibility restrictions for younger players. So the first thing I want to go into is their case. So their first contention was about education, and that because these football players have to wait 3 years until they're out of high school, they prioritize getting into a good college for football and practicing the sport they love before making the decision to enter the NFL. And it incentivizes students to earn a college education. But I'd like to point out, judges, that the way this resolution works is when the NFL significantly reduces its eligibility restrictions for younger players, it means that if you are an extremely talented player and you apply for the draft, they'll tell you if you got in or not, and then you're able to go to the NFL. So in their world, right, they're trying to get a college education, and in our world, if you're extremely talented, you're going to be able to go to the NFL. How do we know that this is a success story? Because the NFL is only drafting high school players that are incredibly talented. In the same way that I'd like to kind of look at the NBA a little bit, the NBA, almost every single person that comes straight out of high school is a beast, and they're immediately scoring points because these high school athletes have to have something that their college counterparts don't. So whenever they say that they have to earn a college education, in our world, they're not earning a college education. Instead, they're making millions of dollars straight out of high school. So although the negation is trying to say which one is better for the person, there's a clear better option here, which is them making a lot of money. Because like I said, if you are coming straight out of high school, you are guaranteed that money. And the NFL offers you insurance benefits, something that the negation didn't even touch on. The fact that if you're injured in college, right, you will have no plan to get there. I'll get into that case later. So they say if they're going to college, they're prioritizing their education. But the whole point of going to college outside of football and all this is to make more money. That's the whole point. That's why these people are going to college, is because they want the prospect of getting into football. So they have to wait 3 years in doing so. Well, in our world, if they're good enough to do it, they're going to go straight into there and they're going to start making money. And they said that almost all NFL players have a college education. And in our world, right, they don't need to go to college. But I like to point out that in the status quo, it's already not that great. Like they said, most NFL players, right, aren't doing that great financially because a lot of them aren't paying attention in college. This is something they completely ignored. For a lot of these college athletes, they're taking the most simple classes and there are literally NCAA colleges where your math is middle school education math, just so they can get their college athletes through. So when they try and say that the colleges are giving them an education, one, it's not a real education. It's a sports education, which is known to be significantly less demanding and won't actually help in the way that they say. I'll get to it at the end if I have time. And two, we're pointing out the fact that when you're weighing it, right, these people would much rather just want to start making money. It's like you're an extremely talented electrician, but instead of going straight into the field, someone tells you, go to college for four more years. Of course not. If you're talented enough, you should be able to go. And they also said, they tried to say that the young athletes go broke or quicker, but I actually know a little bit about the source. That's because the older athletes, they just keep playing because they're just better than those younger athletes. I'm not sure if that makes sense. The more you play in the NFL, the better you get. I know you're kind of raising your eyebrows. So for example, the reason Tom Brady's not broke is because he stayed and kept playing in the NFL. So the younger athletes, the reason they go broke is usually because if they get injured, they have that insurance, they have that money, and then it's no longer there. But that's still a better alternative than in college having no money and being injured. Because that's the alternative, right? It's the lesser of two evils there. So the second contention was that the average NFL career lasts 4 seasons. And they talked about how 80% of people go broke within 2 years. But they said in the status quo that all these players have a college education. So college education isn't as valuable as they're trying to make it sound. Well, we're talking about the fact that these players are able to go in earlier and they're getting paid for it. That's the important point here. Third contention was that football players that get drafted in the NFL at 18 won't get a college education and they won't get long-term success in life. As we pointed out, high school people that go straight out of high school are different than the college athletes in that they are a special breed. They are a very small percent of people who are so good at what they do that the football players, the football scouters are like, we need them straight out of high school. If they're doing that, they have a higher probability of success because of natural selection, because of the fact that they're so good that they're very likely to succeed. It's the same thing with the NBA. Almost any time that a high school athlete is drafted straight out of high school, it's a success story because they're geniuses of their craft. That's basically what it is. They're prodigies. So when they're trying to say that they're going to fail, I'd like to point out that these are the exceptions to the rule. High school athletes who go straight into NFL are the exceptions and violate a lot of the general principles that they're talking about. They talked about how youth drafting is bad and how it takes years of weightlifting and training and young players don't have the physique of older players. But it's also true that younger players don't that goes both ways, right? That you only have so long to use your incredibly healthy body. When you're 18, 19, 20, you have a limited time span. So you're making these college athletes wait a few more years and then having to play when they could have been playing when their body was already at that incredibly good physique. Something I'd like to talk about is the NFL Combine, or the Combine, which is a place where NFL athletes go to see how talented they are athletically. So while, yes, generally younger people are weaker and less fast, the ones that come out of high school are the exceptions to that rule, and that's why they're going straight to the NFL. And they were talking about one of their links is that it courses young people into a dangerous sport right out of high school. But this is actually way worse in their scenario because they're coercing young people into a dangerous sport for college for a few years and they aren't getting paid for it. They're trying to make it sound, they're basically NCAA spokespersons where they're like, don't worry, they're getting an education. They'll be fine. But they aren't getting paid. They would much rather have a 6-figure salary than a diploma at the end of 4 years. And they talked about how entire lives have ruined if they face life-threatening injuries, which we'd like to turn this on them and say that they're significantly worse in college because they aren't insured. They aren't under a contract. They don't get paid for that work. It's like interning for 4 years, but you're doing a super dangerous sport. So now let's look at our harms inherency. So our first contention was about talent, right? And how if someone's talented to play enough for the NFL when they leave high school, because they have to be talented enough. They're not just your average person. These are the exceptions to the rule. They said it doesn't mean they have maturity, but that's one of the main reasons they do it is because they mature early, because they're already so good at such a young age. These are geniuses. It means they were better than their college counterparts, if that makes sense. So point B was on unnecessary injury. And they were trying to misconstrue this and by saying that there's a higher likelihood. And while there is a slightly higher likelihood of getting injured in the NFL, our point is that they're getting paid for it. It's like working for a really dangerous job, but you aren't getting paid. You're just getting an education. Of course, you'd rather get paid for that really dangerous job. And they said that NFL is more dangerous and that it's better in the college world to see if they're cut out for it. But it is way worse to be injured in the college world because you don't have a backup plan. You don't have something that protects you. You don't have the best sports doctors in the world to help heal you. And subpoint C was the lack of fair pay. And they said that college football doesn't coerce these players because they get an education, and education doesn't pay the bills. Making money is what does that. It is absolutely coercion because they're saying, hey, if you can't go to the NFL, so come with us for a few years, right? That's literally what coercion is. If instead they just went straight to the NFL, they'd be able to make money, right? So the positive effects of our plan, one, was the fact that there's going to be less risk of injury because they're with better trainers and the fact that they're actually getting paid for it. 2 was the fair use of talent. And 3 was the fair use of money. Because in the status quo, they're basically getting robbed for a few years in hopes that these college athletes and these college places, because they make money, NCAA makes money, but they don't pay their athletes. Because of that, you should vote for the affirmation. Thank you.
All right, everyone, my order will be negation, then affirmation. My speech is going to be 8 minutes. So my time will begin, My time will begin now. So first, let's just do an overview of this run up until this point. We understand that right out of high school, it can be really frustrating if you know that you're really good at football, but you want to get into the NFL. But my opponents are talking about the very few people, maybe 5 to 10 of the exceptions of the rule, might be able to play in college. But the problem is this is nothing compared to the hundreds of other high school students that are throwing their lives away because they think that they're good enough to join. So the magnitude of those people whose lives are being ruined is going to be a lot greater. Let's go to the disadvantage on education. They say that the resolution states that if you're talented and if you apply to the NFL, then you're going to get in. But really, my opponents are disregarding the soul and the entire point of this contention here. We're telling you that in the short term, that success of being in the NFL is nothing compared to that long-term stability that you can get from education. And these kids have no incentive to invest in their education if they're already accepted into the NFL. There's no strings attached. Right now, we're telling you that in the status quo, we're allowing them to get that education, and that is actually a prerequisite for being accepted into the NFL. That is a good thing. Our second point is on financial planning, and they say that the whole point of going to college is to make more money, but we argue that they can still make more money off of investments and get a good education while doing it. You don't need to go and it's not mutually exclusive. So in the affirmation world, what they're saying is there's going to be no college, no investments, no planning, whereas in our world, they're investing in their futures, and if they want to, they can then go to the NFL and still have a successful career. But if it doesn't work out, they have a plan B. Then they say that in the status quo, these players are not doing that great financially, but extend how there is a trend to make more financial planning right now across all sports. So the status quo is still preferable. We're seeing the changes being made right now. Then they say that even if they do go to college, these students are taking very simple classes, but some education is better than no education. My opponents are getting zero education in their world because these immature high schoolers are going to be going to the NFL, having no time for school, and they're not going to have the ability to learn. I'll take that POI right after this point. They say that older players keep playing to get better and to make more money, but we argue that that just means that there's no guarantee that they won't get injured, right? Age doesn't matter if everyone's going to get injured at some point. I'll take your POI.
Is it not true, though, that someone could go to college in this world for just 1 year and then go to high school? Because you can still apply for the draft while you're in college in our world. So it's not mutually exclusive.
But we're telling you that there's no incentive to go to college, right? Right now, the NFL requires them to apply to college or to at least have some sort of education. Then they argue that younger players leave because they go broke and they're going to be unsuccessful. But we argue that younger players will be burnt out if they're exploited and their mental health is ruined after they are unsuccessful. So extend all of our impacts on my opponents dropped on how education is very important to brain development and all these things about how college is key. Let's go to our second disadvantage on youth drafting bad. They first say that some high school players are just a special breed and they're prodigies, but we argue that just because they're good doesn't mean that their bodies are physically prepared to face the brunt of that pain and the pressure of their adult opponents. Remember that not all of their opponents are the same age as them. There are a lot of NFL players who are a lot older and they can still do a lot more damage. Then they say that you only have so long to use your healthy body and they should get the most benefit out of it right now, but we argue that it's not worth it. It's too risky. These injuries can ruin these young people's bodies for the rest of their lives. And if we want to just waste their entire bodies away, there's no point in that investment getting ruined. So I don't understand why they're making this argument. Then our second argument on exploitation. They said that people aren't getting paid in college and that college is another form of exploitation, but just because they're not being paid in college right now doesn't mean that they won't later on. Like judges, if you've gone to college, you were broke in college. Everyone was broke in college, but you make money after college because that is where you get your credentials. And they said there's no insurance in college and that you're more vulnerable, but really the entire point of college is to prepare yourself for your future. And if you don't have that insurance now, you're at least going to have the money to pay for it later on. So let's do a world by world analysis here. If you get rejected at the end of high school, you have basically zero options. You are broke, you are impoverished, your life is ruined. But if you get rejected at the end of college, hey, at least you have this diploma. At least you can still apply to other jobs and you have a backup plan. That is the world of negation, whereas my opponents are just trying to throw these kids into the big NFL scene without any preparation, no financial planning, and that is honestly risky to their mental health and their economic stability. So let's go into the affirmations case here. My opponents argue that these younger players have matured earlier and their bodies are they're just geniuses and prodigies. But being a prodigy is not dependent on your body. Your biologically not prepared to be playing against adults, and extend these arguments that were dropped about how just because you're the best and most talented player at your high school doesn't mean that you're going to be making it in the big leagues. I think a lot of people have experienced this in college, that when they go to college, they're no longer the smartest in their class or the best at everything. Then they say on the link level that college is worse, and that college is going to be making the ability to have like insurance and money even harder. But we're literally telling you that college makes sure that you don't have to be reliant upon the NFL for insurance and doctors for the rest of your life. You're able to financially support yourself independent of that. Then they say that there's, no backup plan or insurance, but once again, insurance can't help life-threatening injuries or ones that are permanent for the rest of your lives, such as the ones that these students can get from being in the NFL. And then they finally say that education does not pay the bills, but where are they getting this from? Like, everyone knows that education pays the bills in the long term, right? They're just only looking at these flashy, small percentage of these students who are, making millions of dollars. That is the very small, minority of these players who are actually being successful. Whereas the ones who have education, who have a backup plan, they're the ones who, even after the NFL, even after they reach their physical and mental peak, they are still going to be able to make themselves financially stable. Let's go to their advantage. And I just want to do a quick overview because my partner wasn't able to respond to it. The number of injuries that will occur will not change in the affirmation world. The only difference is the age of those who are injured. Would you rather a teenager get injured or an adult who can physically and mentally prepare for it, and not only economically prepare for it, because instead of having to use the NFL's money or the no insurance from college, they'll have that money after they go to college and they have the ability to get a stable job. And then they talk about a fair use of talent. Using talent doesn't matter if these kids' lives are ruined after they reach their peak. Talent only lasts so long, we agree, but that talent shouldn't be wasted on the potential injuries that they can incur. And finally, they're just kind of throwing these students away after we're done using them. That's literally proof that they're only exploiting them for their talent. They don't care about them as people. So let's just do an underview of the entire round up until this point. My opponent's impacts of being paid more money is not only rendered invalid by the fact that 2% of these players are successful, or a very small minority of these players are successful. And 2, the exploitation of young players leads to those lower salaries. Like, the NFL is taking a huge cut of your money. And 3rd, that even if they are able to play in college, at least they're going to have money from other sources because they can get a job afterwards rather than being solely reliant upon the college or the NFL. So at the end of the day here, what we're seeing is that all of their impacts are going to be outweighed by a ruined physical, mental, emotional health, and on top of that, being economically unstable and being most likely unsuccessful in the NFL. For those reasons, I strongly urge a negative ballot. And at the end of the day, the team that is winning on the weighing mechanism of utilitarianism is going to be the negation. Thank you.
All right. Sorry about that. Okay. All right. So once again, my name is Ria. I will be the final speaker for the negation side in this debate. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Okay.
Sorry, you are Jane?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So with that, just as a off-time roadmap, what I'll be doing in this speech is I'll start with an overview of the entire round. I'll go on to 2 reasons not to vote for the AF, 2 reasons to vote for the neg, and then weighing on both sides of the debate. Yeah. Okay, cool. With that, my time starts now. Judges, at the end of the day, I want you to be asking yourself one question. Who is going to be helping the most number of students at the end of the day? And the answer to this question is very clearly the negative team. My opponents have made it clear time and time again that it is only a very, very small number of students who are qualified enough to make it to the NFL at the age of 19 or at the age of 18, which means at best, my opponents only impact about a couple of people, maybe a dozen high school students who are good enough to make it to the NFL. And I ask you at the end of the day, what matters more, those 10 students or the lives of hundreds, if not thousands more who do not make it to the NFL, who throw their lives away, throw their education away because they think they have a choice, they have the option to make it at the age 18. Now, let's go over 2 reasons why my opponents are not winning this round, 2 non-voters. Their major reasons that 1, these young students are making money, and 2, young students, like, they're going to be helped in the case of an injury. On the point about making money, we have proved to you time and time again that this making money simply does not matter if the money is going to go away in the long term. The problem is in the affirmative world, they have absolutely no college, no investments, no one to help them manage their money, which is why these young players go more broke because they don't have access to financial planning. But extend how we specifically tell you that there has been a growing trend of students to take financial planning classes in college, which allows them to make better decisions. Not to mention this, but more on this on the injuries point, but basically education is the key to making money because you need a college diploma if you want to, 1, manage your money in the football league, and 2, manage your money if you leave the football league. So why would you leave the football league? Let's go on to the second reason not to vote, on the injuries point. Now, there are 2 major arguments on the injuries point. They say that basically there are going to be a lot of injuries and the NFL will help people manage that. But first of all, my opponents concede that the NFL is more dangerous than college football, which means at the end of the day, students should be joining college football so they can get a sense of, hey, am I actually cut out enough to do this or not? Extend the key turn Renee makes, which goes absolutely conceded throughout this entire debate, which is that people who might be the best at their high school are not going to be the best in the big leagues. It is key. It is up to colleges to show them that, hey, you're maybe not just cut out for this as much as you think you are. And the second reason we went on injuries is because in college, people's bodies get time to develop. If an 18-year-old has a life-threatening injury and it cannot be saved by this insurance, that is going to be worse if they got an injury at 24 years old because their bodies will have developed more and can access this. Now, why do we win this debate? So since we've proven why making money and injuries both fall down to education, let's go on to the education and talk about why we win. We're winning on education because the fundamental warrant here is conceded that if you make people go at the age of 8, or if you allow people to get drafted at the age of 18, they are less likely to apply for colleges, do well in colleges, or even want to attend colleges in the first place. They're less likely to apply to colleges, which means they don't even prioritize their education enough. A bunch of high schoolers can think, hey, I can slack off in my high school classes because I know that I'm not going to college, I'm just going straight in the NFL. They get cocky and then they get rejected from the NFL and have no backup option. Second of all, the education is key because like I said, you need financial planning because for long-term financial stability. What happens if someone gets injured in the NFL? They have no backup. Judges, I want to reiterate, it is better to be injured, it is better to be injured and not have a plan B if you have a college diploma than if you don't have a college diploma. Because let's say you're like an ex-NBA player, an NFL player, no one will hire you if you don't have a college diploma unless you are trying to go for football and you can't even do football. So now let's do some weighing to argue why we win. On the affirmative side, or on the negative side, we win on probability because it is always likely that you have an injury in football. And if you can no longer play football, your backup plan comes from a college degree alone. Secondly, on magnitude, there's a very, very few good players that might make it to the NFL, but there are more people who think that they can and then get their lives ruined because of it. And third, time frame. Our long-term time frame is better because adults can handle injuries better due to the physical stress. So in the affirmative world, you see a tiny fraction of players are successful, whereas the majority have no education and end up broke outside the NFL. But in the neg world, you see the vast majority of players who won't be successful at least have a backup plan to land a stable career. For those reasons, I urge a negative ballot. Thank you.
Alrighty. Is everybody ready? Sounds good. I have a 5-minute concluding speech for the affirmation here today. My time will begin on my first word. So, judges, let's look at this round. Our opponents are suggesting that college is crucial for the future success of these athletes. But in our world, if a player is good enough to get drafted directly out of high school, then they are already very good players and deserve to play for the NFL right away. Because if they're getting drafted right out of high school, it's because they're outperforming their competitors who did go to college. So these players deserve to get the financial benefits of playing for the NFL right away because these college athletes, judges, they aren't getting paid. They're risking their lives, risking their bodies every single day they're out on the field, and they aren't getting compensated for injuries as well. In college football, over 20,000 injuries occur every year. If they were in the NFL, these players would be getting compensated for injury, and they would be getting paid for playing football to risk their bodies out on the football field. Our opponents claim that NFL players go broke 2 years after playing. They say 78% of them. And I mean, wow, that's a big number. But our opponents also claim that almost every single one of these NFL athletes have a college education. So a college education doesn't seem to be helping them too much if almost 80% of them still end up broke. So then where are their impacts coming from? My partner poked holes in their arguments with this, and they had nothing to say. Where are their impacts coming from then if a college education doesn't seem to be working? And most college athletes aren't even getting a legit college education. They're literally being exploited without pay. So what are we looking at then? We're looking at a very small group of athletes who could get drafted directly out of high school because they're talented enough, mature enough, developed enough, and good enough. Talented enough to go straight to the NFL. Our opponents try and say these people aren't physically prepared, but that's exactly why they would be making it to the NFL straight out of high school, because they're mentally and physically capable enough to compete in the NFL. Otherwise, they wouldn't be drafting them. And let's say you get rejected from the draft straight out of high school, because most people aren't going to get into the NFL straight out of high school. You can still go to college. As we pointed out, their plans aren't mutually exclusive. Being eligible for the draft doesn't mean you can't go to college anymore. As we pointed out in our plan in my first speech, it means that you can apply for the draft after your first year of college, your second year of college, or your 10th year of college. We're giving these athletes the option. And we've recognized throughout our case that it's only a small amount of students that are going to be getting drafted right out of high school. The rest will likely still be drafted after college. But we believe this small group of athletes deserves the ability and the opportunity to be drafted right out of high school because of their skill level. These are athletes that would be at risk every single day in college football, risk without earning any money, any compensation for injury. If this small group of athletes could go directly to the NFL because they're qualified enough, they should be able to do so. It would be stopping unnecessary risks that could occur while they're in college. It would stop the unfair circumstances that make it so the risks of playing don't even receive compensation, and the fact that they aren't even getting compensated for injuries. This debate isn't about the majority of NFL players. We recognize that in speech number 1. It's about the group of students who are ready, good enough to be drafted right out of high school for the NFL or a few years into college. We believe this small group of people deserve to have the right to go straight into the NFL if they were to be given the opportunity. These aren't young, underdeveloped people. They're physically ready. Otherwise, once again, the NFL wouldn't even be drafting them over their options of college grads. So we, the affirmative team, believe in giving these college athletes believe in giving these graduates of high school and then these athletes the ability to avoid the excessive injuries that will likely occur if they're playing in college, since these athletes would go directly into the NFL. They're avoiding years of injury. B, we're giving these athletes pay. The NFL pays these athletes for the risk of their bodies out on the field, which colleges do not do. C, we are compensating them for injury and giving them better recovery materials. And D, we are also helping athletes realize that football might not be the option for them in life straight out of high school. Many will still decide to go to college and play football, but some will likely realize that since only 1.6% of college football athletes actually make it to the NFL, they shouldn't be taking unnecessary risks associated with 4 years of college, because right after high school, they're getting this rejection from the draft. So we are giving these students, these athletes, the option, the opportunity to make the most of their situation. If they are good enough, they should be able to perform. And in the negations world, you were forced to play football for 3 more years. Something they completely ignored in our case is that in the status quo, it's not just high school graduates who can apply. You can go to college for 2 years and then apply. Well, in their world, you must play football without pay. If you don't, goodbye college. You don't get insurance from these schools. If you're injured, the college won't continue your scholarship. The NFL judges, the NFL is the most fair way for these athletes to get compensation, to get pay, and it is the most fair outcome of this debate to allow that small percentage of students who deserve it to go right into the NFL out of high school and immediately reap the benefits of those awards. Thank you.
All right, great debate, y'all.
Yeah, great job.
Are we disclosing?
I believe we're supposed to have disclosure.
Okay.
Yep.
We are? Okay. Do you want to go first? What do you want to do?
You can go first if you want.
Okay. So I thought that was an excellent round. You were all really, really good. I think fundamentally the issue was the matter of wear and tear on the athlete's body, which is essentially about risk. Opp has a very strong argument that the fresh out of high school football player is not automatically, or you could say categorically by definition, ready for NFL play, right? Just because he's drafted does not necessarily mean he is automatically physically ready to compete with much older athletes, maybe more experienced athletes, especially if we're talking about a game like football, which is very, very, especially dangerous for the body, as opposed to basketball or something, which, it's certainly wearing, but it's not people are physically, jumping into you. Plus, I kept thinking about Aaron Hernandez and that sad story, and it made me question the issue of how physically traumatized a lot of football players really can be. And I've heard other things about, the number of concussions and things like that. And so that certainly, I think, is a contributing factor to much worse issues than whether or not someone plays football. That said, I do think Gov's argument was ultimately stronger because I think since any athlete, either professional or in college, is putting oneself at a tremendous physical risk, and as an athlete, their body is their, stock and trade. It's the essence of what they do. And so being badly injured can ruin your professional career and lose all the things that come with that. So I think they're taking the risk either way, if as a professional player or as a college player. And so to deny them access to at least the lucrative opportunity to be a professional player, which obviously is with risk, but it's a risk that might have a bigger payout. I think they're putting themselves at risk in either case. And so I voted Gov.
I also voted for the Gov, largely on the same grounds, fairness primarily, and that the risks brought up by the opposition aren't fully, they're still inherent in the status quo to a certain extent. I think that there's a lot of focus on the age of the players and their ability to endure and withstand injury. I think in reality that the real issues are not that you're more likely to be injured in one type of football, college or NFL, but the NFL players are all at a more elite level and are delivering stronger, faster hits than you receive in college. And that's what the risk, I think, comes from, and why the NFL has been hesitant to allow 18-year-olds. I think both sides could have talked about how this actually is implemented elsewhere. There was some talk about the NBA, but they're not the only sport that allows 18-year-olds to play. The NHL also allows 18-year-olds to be drafted, and it's a very physical sport. And it's maybe a little closer of analogy to, although maybe not as well known by everybody as the NBA. I think that there, are arguments out there that could have subverted the discussion and mitigated some of the benefits the Gov gave. But in the end, on fairness and the fact that this is a risky endeavor, no matter which side you choose, led me to give the Gov ballot.
Thank you, judges, and thank you, competitors, for a great round.
Thank you. I have a question for the judges, though. What were your thoughts on the education argument? Both judges voted based off of the injuries, but were we winning any offense on education and that long-term analysis?
Yes, I think those were points in your favor. It was undermined a little bit by the discussion that even the players that have a college education still end up in financial difficulty. So I'm not sure, like I wasn't clear on how strong of a winning argument. It certainly helped your case. There certainly could have been more talk of how to, instead of blowing up the system we have, reforming the system so that that education does have more of an impact. I did like what you said towards the end about how some players are going to be cocky and they might just blow off their high school classes and then they're not even going to have the chance to apply for college because they thought they were going to get to the NFL. And if they don't, then they're out of options because they weren't even trying to get the minimum GPA to apply for a college. But I don't think that was introduced early enough or really developed well enough in the arguments.
Okay, thank you. We don't have any other questions. Thank you.
I mean, I'll just echo what he said. I think it was really, honestly, I mean it. It was an excellent round, and you had a great point about education. And I did really take that into consideration. So it was not that it was a weak argument. I just found the other one slightly more convincing. But I thought education was an excellent point.
Yes, I think everyone did a great job and good luck throughout. Oh, sorry, did you have another question?
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to extend on like what the other judge was saying. Is there anything that we could have done to outweigh education out of like, weigh education above like injuries or do something to make it like a winning strategy?
I think it was there. I think it just needed to be a little more developed on sort of like the global impacts to the value of getting an education and how that is going to be diminished. I think, there were points brought up that maybe the education, by the team, that maybe the education players are receiving isn't really the same level of an education that someone going into a different career field might get out of college. So how do you mitigate for that is a interesting question. But I think that you were there. I think it could have just been a little more developed from the beginning on the overall impact to the desire to get an education and how, 16, 17-year-olds that have dreams of being in the NFL aren't going to care about their high school education or going to college at all if they've convinced themselves they're going to go to the NFL. I think that was a strong argument. I just think it could have been more developed earlier.
Yeah, I think that's true. And also, I think if you're curious about strategy, I mean, the injury issue, I think, can be combined with the education issue, because if we are talking about football players, right, like basketball, if you're going to be drafted out of high school, people aren't taking physical shots at you, right? You're running around a lot and it's definitely, wearing on you. But with football, it's not like breaking somebody's leg or, whatever, having a foot injury or something where it's not your mind. This is like concussions. This is, people having serious mental trauma. So that's one of those things where, their ability, you can go to college if you, leave the NFL or whatever, if you get hurt or you just quit or whatever, you get cut or something. But if you're severely concussed and, you're having trouble remembering your own name, then getting your education is going to be really, really hard. And, you may not be guaranteed to have a decent education that can get you a decent job and keep you from poverty. And it may not be your fault. It's just kind of what happens if you're going to play football. I mean, I don't know all the statistics, but I've definitely heard stuff about, the number of concussions and high school kids playing it too. It's the issue of like, if you said one guy, I read an article somewhere, if you realize how many high school kids got concussions and like real problems with their brains because of football, you might think twice about encouraging, high school kids to do it. So you take that into a 22-year-old who just blew all his money in the NFL and would love to start over. I don't know if that's even really possible. It almost negates the education issue in a certain sense.
And I think that also ties into the fact that you can get injured at any level in this sport, high school, college, or the NFL, but that the people that are going to be injuring you in the NFL are the elite of the elite that are faster and stronger and more muscular than the people that might be injuring you in college or high school. So you're stepping up to a different playing field that you might not be ready for. And you guys did talk about that some as far as body development, but I don't know if you tied it in from that perspective, that not only is the risk still there, but that the risk is so much worse at the NFL.
Okay, that made a lot of sense. Thank you. And thank you guys for judging.
Thank you.
Sure, good luck at
Fantastic
the
round. You guys
rest of
were
the
all
tournament.
excellent.
Good luck, guys.
Bye. Good luck.
Bye.